So, welcome everybody. It's a pleasure to welcome you to this year's first Climate Change Matters event, which we've been starting back in 2020 and running for most of last year. This is our first event for this year, and it is not only an event for the Climate Change Matters series, but actually kicking off also a new initiative. My name is Wolfgang Ungra, and I am representing the board of the MIT Club together with my colleague Peter Clement, who will be introducing the speakers later on. It's a great pleasure to welcome you to the topic of plastics, which we believe is one that has a notorious reputation for being something harshly overlooked, not well managed, and we want to understand more about the background. The chat, the fireside chat as a format is one which is quite informal, and we would like to invite everyone to participate with questions. And we would like to do so, of course, also through the chat function, which you have in your Zoom box. So through the chat function, we can actually see your questions, and we can then try to answer them after once the speakers get started. I also want to make you aware that the event is going to be recorded, which just means that your chats will also be visible and your questions, but other than that, there's nothing really to it. So for those people who don't yet know the MIT Club of Germany, we are essentially volunteer organization around, of course, the MIT alums, people who've graduated from MIT, but we've grown beyond that. So we have about 700 alums in Germany of different generations, of course. But we also have many friends of the club who've been joining us through different programs, such as the SMW, the Schule mit Wissenschaft, and various other events. So, of course, as much as we are looking after our alums and keeping the contact to the MIT institution, we are happy to welcome people, especially for topics of interest, like climate change topics. We have visions. We have a mission which we've just put together as a new team. We have a new leadership team that is running the club activities. And of course, we want to have a presence in Germany if we feel there's a time now for us to become active, to be seen. And Peter, if you can go to the next slide, being active means not just organizing events, which of course has been quite difficult in the Corona times, but more move towards also activities and initiatives. And these initiatives, which we want to kick off this year, are sort of packaged under a concept called Sustainability Think and Do Tank. So we want to work with startups, with founders, and connect them together with our MIT contacts, with our alums, with other partners that we have in Germany, but also abroad, and provide not just input into the topic areas, but also in creating the solution. And so today's event is actually the first that will launch this new Sustainability Think and Do Tank. And we will have some focus areas which are very much aligned to the UN. And I would like to hand over to Peter Clement to take us through those and then introduce our speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Wolfgang. Hey, it's Peter Clement, everyone. So I think, as Wolfgang mentioned, we had a pretty successful event series on climate change matters last year. And we thought obviously, that's a topic that will continue to be with us for a couple of years. So how do we essentially handle it from a club perspective? So we actually decided to set up a sustainability chapter, build it into our operating model, and that's essentially the UN Sustainable Development Goals that we are currently focusing on. Yeah, that does not mean that this will change over time. And once we had the sustainability chapter set up and also someone responsible, we came up with this idea of the Sustainability Think and Do Tank to not only do talking in form of events, yeah, that's inspirational, that's great, but actually going to collaborative thinking and even to actions in form of specific programs involved already with the startups he mentioned, alluded to this. How do we do this? We use the lean startup approach. We test, we do a lot of experiments, see how it's accepted on the market, yeah, if people like it, and then include the feedback and decide if we then essentially scale it up or if we give it a different direction or maybe just stop because it's not a lot of value to our ecosystem, to our partners and our alumni. And in the end of the day, the Sustainability Think and Do Tank is a platform to connect, take action, exchange knowledge, and the Smart Circular City program that I showed to you on the next slide is essentially the first outcome. That's for this year. You can see it. We are today on the left-hand side. So we start the year with one specific problem around smart circular cities, which is the problem of plastics. We will then start shortly after the event today our first program, which is a sustainability mentorship program, where we will offer schools in Germany to get mentors from MIT, from the MIT alumni base, and also from our partners. We will then have a focus on solutions over the summer, as you can see. So we start with an event which is very much focused on startups. We will then start a kind of smart circular city startup program where we bring the MIT ecosystem to startups, yeah, who are around sustainability solution. And then in fall, we will extend it with another event looking more on the ecosystem, where we will include, besides startups, corporates, academia, government, and also venture capital. And then we close out the year with an event on mindset, motivation, and measurements that look again more broader on the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And besides these events and these programs, we will also see where we can bring parts of the MIT ecosystem in programs that our partners run and where the MIT and the MIT Club and its alumni can fit in. So today our focus is on plastic as part of the circular economy. You may have seen that the UN has a new kind of agreement similar to the Paris Climate Agreement on plastics. Was just a couple of weeks ago where it was agreed on in Nairobi. And that's the link to it. We will send out the slide decks later on anyway, so you have the link and can look at it. And when we planned this event, this was not yet in the works. So that supports, I think, the notion that plastics is an important topic to look at the moment. And coming to today's experts, and we have a great panel group of experts here on the topic of plastics. We have Chris Noble from the MIT Environmental Solutions Initiative with us. We have Chris Floor from the Munich International School, and also Peter Nitschke from PlasticBank, and everyone brings a kind of unique perspective to this topic. So how we are going about this fireside chat. So we have essentially a list of initial questions for our three experts. And I just read it to you for a moment. How can we continue to take advantage of the benefits of plastics by reducing its harm? How can we create income for poor people through plastics in the circular economy? And what about plastics and awareness in education? And so you can see, if you remember our expert panel, there's almost like a natural fit to these questions. So how we do this is our experts will start addressing this question and start a fireside chat. And as Wolf mentioned, you can essentially put in your questions into the Q&A sessions. Me and Wolf will monitor the Q&A and then essentially throw in the questions where it makes sense. If you have some questions and we run out of time and we were not able to answer it, we will see if we can get essentially written responses for our experts and then distribute it together with this slide deck. And then with further ado, let me say thank you to all our experts who are joining us today and investing their time here, so we really much appreciate it. And let's start maybe with the first question. How can we continue to take advantage of the benefits of plastics while reducing the harm? Yeah, and maybe I can give this question to Chris Noble to start us off. Chris?
Sure. If you can, here I am. So first of all, thank you, Peter and Wolfgang and Diane, for organizing this great session. I'm really looking forward to it for several reasons. One of them is alumni groups have a really powerful role to play in the action of MIT, and I'm going to refer a bit more specifically to that in my answer to your question about how we deal with plastics. I just wanted to say personally that I've been working for MIT for a few years now, but I spent most of my career in the private sector and as an entrepreneur for a while. But before that, I'm also an MIT alum. And I met my wife at MIT, and our son is an MIT alum. So there's a lot of MIT alums in our family. And the alumni network is not just a powerful set of individuals, but people who work for institutions that are very important to us. And I mention this because the connections between different kinds of institutions, between the private and public sector, is a key part of solving the problem of plastics. My group at MIT, Environmental Solutions Initiative, we work across all 5 schools of MIT. We're a catalyst for new programs around the environment across MIT, and plastics is one of the areas that we have chosen to focus on for a variety of reasons. One of the reasons is that it's a really challenging problem. Plastics are a miracle product. They do things that nothing else can do. They're very cheap. It's very flexible, but it also creates huge environmental problems that are the other side of that coin. So, specific answer to the question, what can we do about plastics? And I think it falls into 3 themes. The first one is, there is no silver bullet, as we say in English, no single solution to the plastics problem. It's a very complicated problem. We have to reduce, reuse, and recycle plastics. We have to work across the whole range of issues related to plastics and not bank on finding some miracle solution. So I think that's a very important theme. The second one is solving the problem of plastics is going to require very close collaboration between the public sector, the private sector of the economy as a second constituency, and then the third constituency of communities and individuals. We will only solve the problem of plastics through that collaboration between the public sector, the private sector, and communities and individuals, is the second theme of this. And then the third one is that the value chain of plastics is so long and so complex that industry has to work collaboratively. Plastic companies have to work together with their competitors. They have to work with their suppliers, and they have to work with their customers to find solutions. This cannot be addressed individually by companies and can't be addressed individually by one stage of the value chain. We at MIT are trying to work and contribute to all 3 of those dimensions. Number 1, working on the variety of problems. Number 2, working on the collaboration between the public sector, the private sector, and communities and individuals. And number 3, building consortia of companies within the plastics industry and across the supplier and customer base of the plastics industry to tackle problems and find solutions as a group. And I'll be happy in the fireside chat to go into more details about the way we are trying to contribute to all 3 of those areas, and also how your institutions, the ones that the attendees of this event work for, could work with us in the future. So those are my opening comments, and I'm really happy to be part of this group with you today.
So Peter and Chris Floor, any comments from you around benefits of plastics and how we can still use them while reducing harm? Peter, you're raising your hand. Just speak up.
Yeah, thank you. I think I agree with what Chris said. We need a systemic approach, and it's very necessary. And plastic will not go away. Actually, plastic will increase because our consumption patterns are changing. And so we need to find a way to resolve the plastic waste crisis. So plastic in itself is a very useful product. Only when it becomes waste, it becomes a problem. And if you look at the situation right now, we are producing yearly about 220 million tons of plastic waste. And this will increase to more than 400 million tons of plastic waste in 2040. And about of these 220 that we use now, about 90 million are mismanaged. So that means almost 2/5 of the plastic waste that we produce is not managed sustainably. And this will even increase further. So we need to find ways which Chris said, where the industry, the private sector, the government, and the consumers work together, but also MIT as a university, the academe, we're coming up with new innovations, and technology is also very important. And so what Chris said, reducing systemically the plastic pollution would be, we could reduce 30% of it, but we also could, for example, substitute plastic with other materials. Of course, we have to look, is the life cycle of those materials worse or not? We need to invest heavily in recycling. Actually, we could produce or we have to build a lot of recycling plants, which would also, of course, needed recycled plastic to be competitive to new plastic or virgin plastic. So that would be a big way, and there would be new innovations, redesign, for example, plastic packaging to be that it's being recycled, reduce it. So there is a systemic approach needed so to stop the plastic wave that is coming our way on a global level, and we need all work together. Thank you.
Hi.
Chris, hello.
Thank you. First of all, it's really an honor to be invited, and I appreciate what everyone's been saying. I just wanted to add from the education perspective, I think based on what we were just saying, we need to reframe in education that this is indeed a problem, but that a problem is an exciting thing. And I often say to students in education, we give you guys problems. You know, you go home and you got to work on a math problem. We give you problems. Problems are not bad things. Problems are things that we use to learn with. And I think in education, we're trying to reframe this. I am, at least, and many of us in my school, to see it as an exciting issue. You know, yes, it's a problem, but the work on it and the solutions that are available are exciting. And trying to give our students sort of a reframing that there's hope and that science is a really exciting field that can do a lot to solve these problems. Because there are many students, I think, are feeling overwhelmed with problems, and much of the news and mainstream media can be sort of negatively tinged. And I think we need to reframe this whole question. Yes, there's a problem with plastics, but that doesn't mean things are dire and hopeless. It means we got some work to do. And the way we do that work is we get on the ball and we work, as Chris was saying, collaboratively. And there are many, many areas to work in, and it's exciting and it's positive, and we can do this together. So I guess we're trying to push that in to reframe this in education, that this is a good problem.
Thank you, Chris. So just interject here a little bit. So we get the first questions coming in. So me and Wolf will just essentially put out a couple of questions for you, and where it makes sense, also address it to specific people in our expert panel. So there's one from Sarah, and she asks, is plastic so free of hazardous substances that it isn't included in ROHS? Could using less and the cradle to cradle, probably cradle to grave, maybe life cycle approach like ROHS work for plastics as well? Chris Noble, do you want to maybe take a step on this question?
Yeah, sure. On the first question, I think the first question refers to microplastics and the breakdown of plastics into a size that interferes with cellular life. This is a big part of the problem, and microplastics are being studied from a preventative point of view, from a recycling point of view, capturing point of view, putting filters on washing machines, for example. The food chain effects of plastics are not well known, and that's sort of a scary thing. So we need to understand better what impact microplastics are having, because it's an unknown problem, and an unknown problem can be a serious problem. So totally, the breakdown of plastics and their impact on the food chain is part of the reason why we need to get our arms around the issue. And a lot of work is going on in that area. And by the way, there's a lot of work that is going on in every aspect of plastics. I think I want to reiterate the sort of good news, bad news. I think there is a heightened awareness that we need to take systemic approaches. The new UN resolution is a testament to that, and they really highlight the fact that this has to be a systemic approach across the whole chain. I'm not sure if I really understood the second question. Again, could you, Peter, repeat what the second question was?
The question was around if ROHS is a kind of life cycle approach that works for plastics as well, because I know it from the computer industry and metal essentially. So the question is the kind of established life cycle approach for plastics, Chris.
Yeah, I'm not an expert in different life cycle approach models, so I won't comment on that.
Okay, Chris, Floor or Peter, do you have any opinion on life cycle approaches for plastics?
First, I would like to add that I think quite a big amount of microplastic is generated by car tires that, as they are on the road, small plastic fragments of the car's tires are being washed into the soil or in waterways. That is actually where the direct microplastic is generated. A lot of microplastic is generated also by breakdown of bigger plastic particles, especially in the ocean, that is then being eaten by animals. As far as the life cycle is concerned, one difference with plastic is if you melt plastic, the molecular substance changes slightly. So unlike metal or glass, which you basically can recycle indefinite cycles, plastic, like for example polyethylene, can only be recycled maybe 4 or 5 times. Then the molecular structure is damaged in a way that it can't be recycled anymore. So even, let's say, there are now bottle-to-bottle factories being built to recycle polyethylene, but that means what plastic producers are doing is they always mix in a certain percentage of virgin material to ensure that the quality of the plastic products keeps up to the standards that they need for their products. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Peter. I see from Susan a question for Chris Floor. When I speak to K-12 students in schools about environmental issues, I tell them that I'm counting on them to find a clean way to reuse and dispose of plastics. I try to frame it as a subject that they can look into as they continue with their studies. I'm glad you agree. So could you maybe elaborate a little bit from a specific examples from the Munich International School, how these environmental topics, including plastics, are included in the curriculum?
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, I have mixed feelings about that. It's interesting. I think we should ask students to step up to the table, but I think we need to be doing it ourselves first. I think I was very proud of our school that the administration took it upon themselves to eliminate all the plastic bottles from our campus. That's probably the most powerful message. It's one thing to ask students to step up and make change and save the world. But I think if they look around and they don't see us doing it, our message is extremely diluted, to say the least. So the first thing our school did was to eliminate all the plastic bottles that we used in cafeteria. We simply installed filtered fountains and gave all our students stainless steel bottles that they can refill every day. And there is no more soda or fizzy water, or all these drinks are gone from our campus. And it was a very mild adjustment time, and they very quickly adapted, and that was that. So I think that example setting is more powerful in some ways than anything we can say. We need to be doing it first. Just to harken back to the prior question and how that connects to this question, I do believe we can, for example, legislate changes. I think having children, again, feel that there's hope and that advocacy is worthwhile, and that governments and other groups are responsive and do care about them. I think of examples such as when we eliminated smoking from restaurants and airplanes. It was a simple piece of legislation. There was a little outcry, and then it was over, and now all these places are smoke-free. It can work pretty well. And I think we should be a little quicker off the bat to do that. That's, again, restoring faith in democratic governments. I think that's important, that we give the legislative bodies power and we put our faith in them that they can make these changes, and then industry and populations can adapt quickly. So yeah, keep telling students to get involved. Science is a really great career path. Another thing to do is bring in scientists, just like this. This is fantastic. And just being invited to this, I've been asking all my colleagues, I'm on this panel, and what should I say about K-12 education and the problem with plastics? And just generating that conversation in our school has been fantastic. So keep it up, keep talking to the students.
I'd like to reinforce what the excellent comments that Chris Floor was making. That first of all, let me just say, I work for MIT. We really focus on technological solutions. There's a lot of opportunities to address this problem with technological invention at every stage. And we're working on it, and other people are working on it, and there's a huge amount to be done, and more is being done. But there's also a very powerful social aspect to it, and I'm glad Chris raised the example of smoking. Smoking was realized to be a very big problem after it was a glamorous thing to do, and the solution to smoking was not new technology for cigarettes. It was government action, but also community awareness, and awareness at the level of individuals about the impact of their behavior. And I think this is an interesting parallel for the plastic problem, and also for the role of education. It's not so much of encouraging kids to become scientists, although that's important, but to develop their ability to take social action and to be part of communities that take action socially on problems, so that it's government action for sure, it's new technology and new innovation, but it's also communities taking control and moving and acting to improve the world around them.
Yeah, Chris, I just want to say thank you for that because, and to clarify, I don't only advocate that students become scientists. I think that's a very interesting point. And wherever they're working, whether it's in journalism or politics or in poetry, you can attack this problem from all those angles. And I agree with you. And I think it's very important to create a climate where we feel like we can together do these things. And we can. And that's really important. Thank you for those comments.
I'm jumping in because I noticed there was a question on the chat about the UN resolution that just passed. Let me just say a couple words about that, if I may. It's pretty short. You can find it on the internet. It's pretty short for UN resolutions. I think the whole thing is about four pages long. But what it says is, number one, the UN has decided as a body that it will create a binding plan around plastics in the next 2 years. We're giving ourselves 2 years to come up with a binding agreement related to plastics that all of the member countries of the UN will agree to. So that's number one. Number two, that they recognize that this will have to be a comprehensive agreement that will not focus on any particular issue, but look at the whole landscape of the way plastics are made and distributed and used and recycled and disposed of. And so it needs to be comprehensive, and that it will involve the inputs of a broad set of institutions. This is sort of a summary of the document. That sounds like a sort of fluffy, but I think it's very important that the UN has voted to bind itself and bind all its members within 2 years to a plastic agreement. So that's sort of the summary of the resolution, but I would invite people to read it. It's actually not very long.
I would like to take up on another question, which came very early on by Nancy. It goes in the similar direction. So Nancy was asking, of course, on the one side, we're looking at the problem being the waste, but what about the production and alternatives to the production? I don't know who wants to take this question, you, Chris, or Peter Noble.
I can make a couple of comments.
Sorry, Peter Nitschke, sorry. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Go ahead, yes.
So the first comment is the vast majority of plastics are made from petroleum products. Not all, but almost all. So there's a tight connection between the production of fossil fuels and the production of plastics. And in fact, as we see the development of electric vehicles, the oil companies see the future of production of oil for combustion going down, and they are redeploying assets into plastics and generally into downstream non-fuel products for oil. So this is another aspect of the plastic challenge, which it is closely connected to a sunset industry, to the fossil fuel industry that we are trying to eliminate economically. So I'll just make that comment, and I'll let my co-panelists say other things about the question.
Well, I think the main problem is the production of single-use plastic, because a lot of plastic that is produced that is not single-use plastic. For example, airplanes are made out of 25% out of plastic to make them lighter, or even our cars are made are also 1/4 plastic. The bumper inside, everything is made out of plastic. But those are plastic products that are there for years, even decades. You know, like planes are flown for 30 years sometimes. So those plastics are not the problem as such. What is really causing the waste are the single-use packaging plastic. And for example, only 9% of those plastic wastes are being recycled. And so the incentives for the industry to use recycled material is very, very low. And as Chris said, the oil in production and plastic production are connected. And that means, for example, if the oil price is low, virgin plastic is cheaper than recycled plastic resin. So that means it can't compete. Then in some countries, there are subsidies on fossil fuel that recycled plastic does not enjoy. So that means there needs to be a shift in the plastic production, moving away from virgin plastic, but increasing the rate of recycled plastic and also the recyclability of plastic products that are being put into the market. Because if that doesn't make sense, we produce more and more virgin plastic while not recycling the plastic that we are producing. So that is one approach. Of course, there are quite a lot of plastic products that doesn't need to be packaged in plastic. So like you buy a package of chocolates and it has 3 different plastic wrappers, and maybe each chocolate piece is wrapped in another plastic. That is just insanity. So there is a lot of plastic packaging we could eliminate, and that would be something where we could reduce the plastic production as a whole as well, or limit it. Yeah.
Peter, maybe one question that came from Sarah, which I would like to throw at you as you're already discussing it. She was asking whether or not there's not enough plastic that could be used for petrochemical industry to replace oil in producing new plastics. So you did mention the cost of doing that is higher, but are there ways of making it, giving it an incentive to use existing plastics and not necessarily recycling them to other products, but actually putting them back into the petrochemical process? And I obviously that would need to be feasible.
Actually, the cheapest way to process plastic is mechanical recycling, because that is a very simple process. And it would maybe just needs maybe some tax incentives for companies to use plastic resin. Of course, there are processes for chemical recycling. That means you could technically build plastic back into oil. That process is called pyrolysis. But so far, there have been it has only been in the pilot stage. There is no economically feasible operations of pyrolysis plants that on a scale. And so maybe if there are ways to make it cheaper, and maybe technology is working, I guess at one point it will be possible, then we could do that as well.
Can I just pick up on a question that also came in for Chris Noble, and that ties nicely in what you just mentioned, Peter. Is MIT working on any specific technologies around plastics recycling at the moment that you are aware of?
Yes, we are. I also want to say that we are working with groups of companies together on these problems. So we have, for example, a consortium that we are building of companies that make small hard plastic materials that are hard to recycle because they tend to be small, like packaging for cosmetics and toothbrushes and items like that are used in the billions, but are small and hard and rather complicated. They are sort of a nightmare for recycling plants. So we have put together a consortium of many of the biggest brands, ones that you would be familiar with, to work with us and to work with recycling companies on technology that can be put into recycling plants to handle those particular kinds of products. So that's an example. Another example is we're looking at ways to reduce the complexity of packaging materials. One issue to support what Peter was saying is that a lot of packaging is complicated mechanically. It's several different species of plastics. it's constructed in ways where sometimes you've got films that are plastic that is laminated with metal film. All of these different species have to be taken apart if you want to recycle them. And so a big opportunity is to simplify the design of packaging to make it more recyclable. And we are working on that. And a third area, which is making packaging biodegradable. This is interesting in specific situations. Biodegradability is often what you don't want in a packaging material, for example, for foodstuffs. So this is a complicated problem, but one that can be addressed for specific applications. And so those are three examples of things that we're working on related to those challenges.
I hope that also answers questions that came in from Matthias and from Jan, going in similar direction about the biodegradability of plastics and being able to create more plastics that are indeed biodegradable, but also, of course, the circumstances under which they can decompose. And Jan was talking about why we do not actually tax virgin plastic more directly. And maybe, Chris, if you have something on that as well, on the taxation policy of virgin plastic, do you want to take that one? And then maybe we can see if anyone else wants to answer that as well.
Well, you know, it's all the same. It's an excellent question. It's all the same issues related to carbon taxation. You know, if you, and I think most economists would say that the most efficient way to use taxation to modify behavior related to the environment and sustainability and waste is upstream. So I think all the same arguments about carbon taxation would apply to taxing the value chain of plastic creation at towards the top of the chain rather than towards the bottom of the chain. But I'll let my co-panelists add any comments they would like to add.
Well, I keep thinking, you know, we're bringing up sort of what I call the, you know, I think of the elephant in the room, which is how are we going to get the industry's influence back out of the governmental legislation, at least to some degree. You know, I think that it's tilted too far in this deregulation wave that started in the 80s, where we've handed too much over into the free market. Because it was fun that we, you know, everybody made a lot of money. But I think we need to go back in the other direction and help disassociate some of the industry influence in the governmental decision making and get some of the power back in the other direction, because I don't believe the free market can respond quickly enough in some of these instances. And I don't think they have the incentive to do so unless there's legislative, as you're talking about, tax money. You know, certainly certain industries are always given quite big subsidies by the government through taxes. A corn syrup industry in the United States that aren't always the best thing for the people, and we need to be aware of that and make a lot of noise about it. I'm thinking again of another example, just taking lead out of gasoline in the United States. You know, that took a small number of scientists pushing hard and some very courageous legislators that were willing to get it done. It was a very important act. And I think that we can do that again, but I am concerned about the level of influence that financial interests have on legislative bodies. I don't know how we go about, that's another whole problem, but it plays into this problem.
So just let me jump in. I have a question from Kate Biederman around the prospects that you guys see around PLA-based plastics. Does any one of you guys have an opinion on this or some insights?
I don't want to comment just because I don't want to comment just because it's not an area of technical specialty for me.
Okay, fair enough. Good. Then there was another one in the Q&A around if contaminating oceans with plastics is it really serious, or do we just hear a lot about in the news?
It's scary.
I will comment about that. This is a topic I do know a fair amount about. And taking plastic out of the ocean is like taking CO2 out of the atmosphere. You know, people talk about taking CO2 out of the atmosphere. The cost of taking CO2 out of the atmosphere is 1,000 times higher than the cost of not putting it in the atmosphere. And it's the same thing for plastics. The oceans are so big, the amount of energy that it would take to recover a significant portion of the plastic that's thrown in the ocean would create more environmental problems than they solve. And as Peter was alluding to earlier, plastics break down mechanically and extremely quickly when they're subjected to salt water and sunlight. So ocean plastics also break down fast. So the only solution to ocean plastics is to not dump plastic in the ocean because going to find it there is just not feasible. But it is a problem and it has to be addressed. There's plastic in the stomach of fish all around the world. It's affecting coral in a big way, and they break down into microplastics that get into the food chain. So we just have to really figure out a way to stop dumping plastic in the ocean urgently.
Yeah. If I may add, just to give a few numbers, in the moment, there are about 11 million tons of plastic that we dump into the ocean every year. And that means it's accumulating there because once it's in the ocean, it has no more to go. According to the studies, by 2040, this will be probably have tripled to about 30 million tons. Now, if you want to think about how much is those 11 million tons, if you put the plastic into plastic bags, you can pile them up until the moon. That is how much plastic we put into the ocean, and we have ocean islands. We have plastic islands that are big as France. In those big gyres where the plastic will be just coming together. But, and how Chris said, it's impossible to put it out. It's too much, you know, the ocean cleanup, they put out 10 tons in a week, and at the same time, 100 tons or more goes in, you know, it's like fighting Don Quixote against the windmills. It's not going anywhere. The other thing is this, a lot of plastic is heavier than water, though that means quite a big number of plastic sinks down to the seabed. And once it's thousands of meters under the sea level, you can't get it out anymore. It's impossible. So I agree with Chris that the only way to solve this, or at least to stop making it worse, is to prevent plastic getting into the ocean.
And I'd like to come back and just say, you know, to come back to this idea of being an exciting problem, that's a solvable problem. We know where the plastic, the primary places where the plastic is going into the ocean, and we can help go to those places and stop that from occurring. And it takes some money and investment, but it also is exciting. And I think that the countries where it's primarily happening would welcome that sort of intervention and aid in stopping that problem. I think that's an exciting problem to work on.
I'll also add a comment. There's a question in the chat. When you say dumped into the ocean, do you mean unmanaged plastic that comes down the rivers or off the beaches? We've done some modeling of water flows in rivers and in the ocean for a variety of reasons. Climatologists are very interested, for example, in water flow modeling. And it turns out that most of the plastic that is in the ocean was dumped into the ocean. The plastic that is dumped into rivers tends to sink to the bottom before it can get into deep water. It will accumulate in the river itself and shortly and close to the river. But we have a river dumping plastic problem, and we have a separate ocean dumping plastic problem.
Mm.
And they're both problems, by the way. I'm not suggesting that one is worse than the other, but they also can be amenable to different type of solution spaces. So, but I just wanted to try to answer the question that was in the chat.
I mean, these problems are all distinctly international in nature. I mean, we see flows obviously going across borders of junk and garbage and waste. which needs some governance. We see stuff which goes into the oceans and becomes an international problem. How do we solve, and this was an anonymous attendee asking this question, how do we resolve cross-border issues? And I would add to that, do we have the right mechanisms in place for intergovernmental resolution of these issues? Is the UN the right governance body, or do we have need for more or different ones? May I throw this to all of you, actually, as you did?
Well, that's a great question.
I can make two comments. One is the UN is part of the solution, not all the solution, but it's part of the solution. Secondly, countries are becoming more sensitive about their value chains. So for example, we have legislation in the US, and I know there's legislation in Europe also, where the working conditions in the factories in Asia that make the product that is imported by US corporations is the responsibility of the US corporation. So the working conditions in Asian factories that make the product that's sold in the US by an American company, there's a responsibility that the American company has to the qualities and the environmental practices of their suppliers in other parts of the world. So I think those are two examples, the UN and domestic laws that put responsibility on big corporations for the value chains that they employ outside the borders of the country are two examples of mechanisms, not exhaustive, but two different ways that those cross-border issues can be addressed.
And the AU has started addressing that. In the AU countries now, there's new legislation asking for that responsibility or demanding that responsibility. I'm thinking of acid rain, the acid rain situation that was occurring with pollution going in from the US into Canada, and there were actually lawsuits brought to, and maybe that there has to be legal responsibility put back on people who are manufacturing things or industries that are manufacturing things, and when their products end up in my backyard or in international waters or influencing my ability to procure food or whatever, that there may be legal action that can be taken.
I think especially with ocean plastic, there is also the problem that, of course, it washes around everywhere. And is, for example, ocean plastic polluting countries often have a high level of poverty. They have a very low level of waste management. Most of the waste management is in the hand of informal collectors, which PlasticBank, for example, is working with in incentivizing informal collectors to collect plastic. So it needs probably help or assistance or to work to increase the waste management in countries where much plastic goes into the ocean, and there are international alliances and different stakeholder groups addressing that, and different social enterprises like PlasticBank, but it needs probably a bigger push and investments in plastic industry waste management to ensure that the plastic there is being collected before it goes into the ocean. It needs also awareness raising and education for people to understand that even also they as private individuals are responsible to manage their plastic waste responsibly.
For sure. I think that gets us back to the education and a sense of overall responsibility in this. Interesting comment from Jan Hedberg, who said that they've started an initiative to test collecting systems for plastic in rivers, which means actually reducing the plastic that then flows through the rivers into the oceans. So if it is so difficult to actually get hold of course, the plastics once they're in the oceans, maybe the rivers are the focus for the technologies to catch a lot of that and reduce the contamination. We're getting close to the end now, so I'm aware that Probably there's many unanswered questions, but I think maybe we can take one more. Peter, do you want to take one more question? And then I think we will start wrapping up the event.
Yeah, I can have maybe another question here. Interesting, we talked about carbon capture or out of the air, yeah, in the context of plastics. So Sarah asked the question, could we actually store plastics instead of burning it, putting it down somewhere in the earth to get rid of it instead of burning it and setting off CO2 emissions? Any spontaneous reactions from you guys from the panel?
My gut feeling is that sort of hides the problem, number one, and it's not a long-term solution. And number three, communities have an attitude, do it somewhere else, right? Not in my backyard. At some point, we run out of space. A lot of solutions in the past were based on the assumption of an infinite planet, and the planet is no longer infinite. So I don't think that that's an approach that is viable in the long term.
I totally agree with Chris, because plastic is very durable. You put it in the ground, it will be there when we are all dead already, and even our grandchildren are already dead. So I think it's not really something that will solve the problem. And so we need to have another approach. And I think circular economy is one. Plastic reduction is another one. I think that would be things that you need to work on.
Well, I think the question was around carbon sequestering, but I don't think it's the densest form of carbon. If you want to bury carbon somewhere, there are much denser forms of carbon you can bury.
Okay, Peter.
Okay, thank you guys. So unfortunately, we are coming to the hour. Yeah, has been a great chat. We have a couple of open questions. We will go through it. But first, let me thank you, Chris, and Peter, for their thoughtful comments, their contributions, their thoughts, and in general, their time today. So you will get a climate action certificate from us for 5 tons of CO2 emissions reductions from our partner, Climate Partners. And why are we doing this? I think there's a study from MIT around that every Zoom meeting produces 150 grams of CO2 per hour. So that's approximately 300 grams, because we chatted a little bit before the meeting, yeah. But we offset it. So actually, this event is, from this perspective, our CO2 negative. That's something. Yeah, I hope that. But it's also easy for us, of course, to do this. But obviously, the club wants to do its contribution as a thank you, and not only to our participants today, but also to our supporters that you see here on the slide deck. And then I may hand it over to Wolf to talk a little bit about what's coming up from an MIT club perspective to close us out for today. Wolf?
Absolutely. Thank you very much. So yes, as it stands, we have, of course, the year pretty much still ahead of us. Given the fact that Corona is also becoming less of a threat, even though it's still present, and many have it. In fact, even me here right now, as I'm speaking, we're planning more regional events in our bigger cities across Germany around April and May. And actually one of the bigger ones that will take place, where we heartily invite anyone who's interested to join, will be physically in Stuttgart on the 13th of May. It will be about artificial intelligence, whether it's a utopia or dystopia in production. So we're going to be guests at the Arena 2036 with some interesting speakers as well, and some things to see and touch. And for our club members and our alumni, we also have our annual general meeting called AGM. on the topic of smart circular cities in Munich. So we did announce this would be an event taking place in Frankfurt. I just wanted to make sure that we now can inform you here informally that it's going to be in Munich between the 24th and 26th of June. So we hope to see many of you interested in the whole concept of circularity here. And this obviously now, the AGM will be, with its symposium, one of the key events in what Peter was presenting earlier on our sustainability chapter, where we are trying to now not only look at what are the problems, but also find the right people to tell us about the solutions that are being made or developed. And for that, we are going to be scanning a number of different entrepreneurs and startups to give us an insight into what is being done, and then hopefully also gaining support from our community to help those startups become more successful. So in that regard, I want to thank everyone, and I also want to thank our colleagues, Diane at MIT, who's been in the background helping us set all of this up. Thank you so much for making this happen. We hope that you enjoyed your time and that you could take a few interesting insights away and maybe some ideas that you can use in your work and in your initiatives. So thank you for joining us, and stay safe, and hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys. Take care.
Bye-bye.